Welcome to the Fury Theory Podcast, brought to you by EFB Advocacy. EFB means excellent for business. I'm joined by my two colleagues, Adam Belmar, the B, John Easton, the E, and I'm the F, John Fury. And we are here. This is our one-year anniversary of our first podcast. And I tell you what, there's two guys, these two guys are the best two guys to do a podcast with because they know what they're talking about, and they're always entertaining, and they're excellent for business. John Easton, who has been your favorite guest so far on the EFB podcast or Fury Theory podcast brought to you by EFB?
Wow, it's
a surprise question.
That's a surprise question. It's kind of a pop quiz, really, in a way. And it's hard for me to narrow it down to one. Although, of course, Topher Cushman, come on. I mean, talking about the Redskins on this podcast was a lot of fun. Love the congressman that we had, and I just like all guests, honestly, that we have on.
I think that our guests have been great. I think they've added a lot to it, and we're going to have a guest next week, Congressman Tom Rooney, so make sure to watch the show. It's going to be fantastic. I like the fact that when we had the faux podcast with Paul Kane and Carl Hulse, they came in and we did kind of a special edition. That was a lot of fun. Adam Belmar, who was your favorite guest thus far?
I can say without equivocation that my favorite guest to date has been Gail Osterberg of the Library of Congress.
Right.
She is funny. She is warm. She was full of so much information. It was really at the beginning of our podcast, and we were still getting our sea legs, but she was terrific. I hope we get her back.
I hope we get her back as well. All the guests, I liked them all. I like Garrett Graves, who was our first congressman, Rodney Davis, Jeff Denham, Ram Upaluri, who is not a congressman, but actually ran for Congress once.
Ram was great, and Meg Houck.
Meg Houck was fantastic. So if you want to be a guest on the Fury Theory podcast, I have had one, Terry Heffernan, who's a friend of ours. Is a comedian, but also has another job.
Really?
It's a guy.
Is he really?
He is really a
Pick
comedian.
that up.
He's going to come on in a couple weeks. He's already kind of committed, so it's going to be a lot of fun. The guests just keep on coming, and we have so much fun here on the EFB podcast. You know what? This goes to my first theory. Tired of winning. I know that I'm not tired of winning so far with the Fury Theory podcast brought to you by EFB. And Adam Belmar, President Trump has had lots and lots of victories himself. Are you tired of President Trump winning?
I am not tired of winning yet. I've still got room for more. And I'd like to fill up on as much winning as we possibly can before November. But I am proud of late that the president's good intentions are translating to action. And I think that's really what he wants more than anything else. As a deal maker, not just as a president, he's trying to find common ground. He's constantly probing what's possible. And even though his instincts have been off a little bit and he's had to be tamed and sort of reeled back in by folks like Speaker Ryan and Leader McConnell, he's getting his sea legs and he's getting action. And I'm glad to see him do that for
So
all of us.
you're not tired of him winning. Let's go through the list here. The economy is booming. Peace is breaking out in Korea. The Mueller case seems to be falling apart. Republicans got 100,000 more votes in the Ohio state election, which is really pretty impressive. And Don Blankenship lost in West Virginia. Huge victory for the president and Senator McConnell. John Easton, are you tired of the president winning it?
Exhausted. I'm absolutely exhausted. No, I think that all that list was a very positive, a very bullish Trump list. I would say that I would agree with a decent part of it. I would say it's very bullish. I think that the economy is it. And we've talked about this on this show.
Oh, yeah.
We've talked about the economy, and I know the three of us agree, and many of you agree as well, that as the economy goes, these elections go, and the economy is doing well. I still, keeping my eye on wage growth, and it was flat last month.
Yes, it was.
And
Which is good for inflation.
yeah. Actually, what needs to happen with wage growth, we all know that inflation is going to tick up a little bit as the global economy is hot and the U.S. economy is hot. But wage growth needs to tick up to keep pace, or else what's going to happen is it's diminished wages, because of inflation. So I look at that and I just feel like the tax cuts and the growth in our economy and the global economy is really going to lift boats. But we just got to see wages go up.
So a little of this was tongue-in-cheek. I mean, the president has been losing a lot, too. The White House is still kind of a chaotic mess.
He's been winning louder.
He's been winning louder, and he also, Adam, I was at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and I thought that was a winning night for him because he was not there. And the press still largely hates this guy, and I thought that the comedian that was part of it was sometimes funny, mostly profane, but she offended everybody. The president still has some downsides, right? I mean, I'd like to focus on the winning, but it's not just the winning.
Well, the distraction that so often has plagued this presidency has been investigations around Russia and the attack politics that the president sometimes employs. And that has been the more quiet, depending on which television channel you listen to, of the losing recently. But the revelations, both with the Mueller investigation and with the Stormy Daniels, and recently understanding more about what his personal attorney, Michael Cohen, did to represent or fleece American companies, we don't know. There is a lot to understand here, and now there may be a Russia connection. At one point this week, I think the press, John, thought that they had found the smoking gun, and to say that they were salivating.
How many times have they talked about the smoking gun? We've seen a lot of smoking guns with this president, and they seem to be smoking. I mean, they keep smoking.
Somebody's smoking something.
Somebody is smoking.
I think that's right. I think you just get tired of this like bombshell and breaking news, and then the next day it kind of peters out. But I think what it gives you, the Mueller investigation, the special counsel, gives you a little bit of insight into Trump world, really pre-presidency, but also that it's followed into his presidency, which is this knee-jerk instinct for hiring. Right, like Ronnie Jackson. When we covered that last week, and that just was not well vetted. We know that now. It's Rudy Giuliani leading his personal legal team. I think that was a terrible decision, and then he and Giuliani and the president conjure up this strategy together. I don't think anybody was really involved with that, but those two. And Giuliani goes out half cocked on the national TV. With a legal strategy, talking about the payment, the Michael Cohen payment. The whole thing was just really, really off kilter. And I think what has happened, if Donald Trump can get this together somehow and realize that in the political sphere, this stuff, this way does not fly. In fact, it gets you into more trouble than you can really handle.
Well, I mean, let's ask, his approval ratings are going up. They're inching up ever so slightly, but they're inching up. And which is amazing given 90% of the press stories about him are extremely negative. So this guy's approval ratings are going up despite a onslaught and a lot of these allegations. I mean, Michael Cohen, to your point, one of the president's downfalls is kind of the knuckleheads he surrounds himself with. And Michael Cohen's a perfect example of that, right, Ed?
Well, certainly Michael Cohen is causing a great deal of angst. And if the president thought he had a fixer in Cohen, what he's got is the anti-fixer. I mean, he's definitely left a trail of mess from the election, perhaps before, all the way until now. But one of the things I like about what John Easton just said, and we talked about this a lot over this last year, is this allusion to reality TV. Make no mistake, Donald Trump is one of the greatest TV programmers of all time. You can say he's a great president. You can say he's a horrible president. The guy knows how to sell something. He knows how to sell himself. Last night was the perfect
Even
example.
At 3 o'clock in the morning.
Well, he quipped to the reporters there that they might just have broken the world record for ratings at 3 in the morning. But he wasn't kidding.
Yeah.
I mean, he has a flair for the dramatic. And when you talk about perhaps a mistake in casting Rudy Giuliani in this leading role, this walk-on role in the middle of the season, he's made for television. He comes with a built-in audience. He's well known to the Fox family, of which apparently Kimberly Guilfoyle is now an adjunct member. Don't know if you saw this today.
Oh, is this new news?
Well, apparently, and Mazel Tov, Don Jr., who's in the middle of a divorce, as we know, has got a relationship going with Kimberly.
No kidding.
Yeah, it's true. You heard it here first.
Talk about winning, huh? That's some winning there.
But here's what, real quick on the personnel side, because I really do think it affects the presidency a great deal. I mean, the cabinet level hires, and certainly your personal attorney, who is out there on the TV circuit. But just as he's made a couple of very questionable and damaging selections in his higher circle of hires. He's also done made some very impressive hires, such as Mike Pompeo. I mean, I think already. I mean, he's just proven himself to be the kind of caliber of cabinet member that you would expect. I think his selection of Gina Haspel, the deputy director of the CIA, nominated to be director of the CIA, is perfect. I think is right on the money and just a quality nomination, not somebody who everybody is raising their eyebrows going, where did this person come from?
Although McCain came out against
I
her.
agree. She's going to get confirmed.
I hope so. I hope she gets confirmed because we need someone like her running the CIA, I think it's important for the president to get that victory.
Yep.
Adam, let's turn real quickly. Winning the president meeting Rocket Man in Singapore. Is he going to win in Singapore?
My feeling about this is that we all need to pay attention to the president's admonition of let's wait and see how it turns out. The design of this summit in Singapore is good location. The timing is good. The run-up has been strong. What people are wondering is, did Donald Trump crack the code on Kim Jong-un, or perhaps did Kim Jong-un crack the code on Donald Trump? There may be a little bit of both going on here, but
maybe they cracked each other's code.
I think they did.
That sounds weird.
But I also really believe that the president's got some momentum, and I want to give him the benefit of the doubt with a new national security advisor, with a great national security team around him, Pompeo at state. They have a chance to make real progress. I don't want to sort of predict or a win or humor any of these people saying, Nobel Peace Prize. One step at a time. But you know what? These are steps we haven't been able to take at all. All good credit to the president for pushing us down a good path.
John, you want to get in on this?
I'll just say that he's just very unconventional in the way he's handling it, and it's paying dividends to get this far. And I'm sure a lot of people, you've heard them, they're very skeptical. I can't believe they're giving Kim Jong-un the stage with the president of the United States. It's just, we've heard that for so many years now. Let him go ahead and try it.
How about trying something new?
Right.
The other thing that's interesting to me, there was a story today about how the South Korean leader gave Kim Jong-un a USB that had a drive
I've read that.
All kinds of plans on what they could do together to revitalize the North Korean economy should this thing go forward and they denuclearize. And I tell you, if this works, it'll be a huge deal, and I think the president deserves some credit for that. Theory 2, Pelosi's promise. Former Speaker and perhaps future Speaker, although I'm a little bit skeptical, Nancy Pelosi promised that if she were to win again the majority in the Congress, that one of the first things she would do is raise your taxes. John Easton, is that good politics?
Well, first, let's just go to Nancy Pelosi's predictions. This is something we hear almost every election cycle. Right. In 2014, I remember vividly, and I went and looked it up earlier today, and she said she was very certain that they were going to pick up the 17 seats necessary to take over the House and make her Speaker again. That's when everybody was pretty confident that Republicans were going to retain the majority, but she went out and said it anyway. And in 2016, she said, of course, Hillary Clinton's going to win the presidency. I mean, there was absolutely no, of course, everybody thought that.
There was no
doubt.
edge.
And then she said further, the Democrats would take over the Senate as well. So it was going to be a Democratic presidency. It was going to be a Democratic Senate. And so neither happened. So now we come to this cycle. Of course, she's saying, I'm taking the gavel back. This time, she's got a little bit more data behind her to back that up. But I wouldn't take anything she says as word. But that's their job, right? That's Chuck Schumer's job. That's her job. That's McConnell's job.
Their job is but the promise I thought was interesting, Adam Belmar, she promised to raise taxes. She promised to repeal the tax breaks of Donald Trump and replace it. And I'm fascinated by this because, she might be onto something because those tax cuts still aren't nearly as popular as they should be. On the other hand, people kind of expect Nancy Pelosi to raise taxes, and they don't want their taxes raised.
Oh, Nancy Pelosi, in my opinion, Thank you for the gift. It's Mother's Day. There was no reason for you to give it to me or the rest of us, but you did.
You're not a mother.
It's the generous soul that you are. I think Republicans need exactly this: a really good, clear, resonant call to arms by Democrats about what you can find with a blue wave crashing in D.C. in November. And you know what? It's going to suck. Your taxes are going to go up, your speaker's going to change, and everything about why you put this president in the White House is going to be compromised. So if that's not a call to arms for Republicans, I don't know what siren song Pelosi can sing that will bring us to the polls better than that.
And maybe, John Easton, that's why Republicans did so much better in Ohio than people thought. But probing a little bit more into the tax cut debate, we worked a lot on the tax cuts, and I still think there's the right economic policy.
Yep.
But cutting corporate rates still is not that popular. So this is still the battle line for this election, don't you think?
Yeah, and I think that sure, it's very good politics and good campaign strategy to go ahead and highlight that the potential future Speaker of the House wants to basically rescind the tax bill and raise taxes, but I think in terms of the general tax debate, both on the individual side and the corporate side, I mean, the best thing that Republican candidates can do is go out and highlight, go to a local corporation that's going to benefit from the corporate tax cuts, and talk to individuals, make sure they're out there on their campaign ads, highlighted in every which way. You got to keep this thing local. Use the tax issue, but don't do it in a national sense. You got to do it, as ground level, as granular as you can.
Adam Belmar, we worked on this quite a bit, and I think that it's still working. Although most of the individual tax cuts don't really go into effect till next year. One thing I want to point out, Republicans are having an internal debate right now as to whether they should vote to make the individual tax cuts permanent. And the House is in one place and the Senate is in another place. The House kind of wants to do it. Mitch McConnell doesn't really want to give Senate Democrats who voted against that tax cut the first time a chance to vote for it. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the calculus that the Senate Majority Leader is dealing with is delicate, and he's right. It's a political season, and you need to be very careful. As far as the 10-year window, which is the way that the eggheads gauge the impact of the tax cuts and future inflows to the Treasury, it's trite to say that time will tell, but we do need to come up with some actual historical data over the next year or two. And I think that it is good to put permanent rate cuts in place for surety's sake. We did that with the corporate rate. Anything less would have probably not brought the intended result, which I do believe we are seeing and will continue to see. But I'm willing to cede the political question to the majority leader. He knows what votes need to be taken and what votes not, and that majority is almost more important than whether we resolve that question this year.
And John Easton, thinking about this, you usually only need 51 votes if it's a reconciliation bill, but they would need 60 votes because they're not going to do reconciliation. Do you think there's any chance that the Senate would work on this at all?
I think that's part of Majority Leader McConnell's calculus on this is he needs 60. Does he put something like this on the floor knowing that it is almost certainly going down?
Right.
And then you'll have a real discrepancy between the House and the Senate. That's valuable Senate floor time. I think that's a big part of this. And I think it's very legitimate. Like you said, John, I mean, just giving some of these Democrats a second bite at the apple where they voted no, and maybe they're kind of licking their wounds on that right now, and they want another chance. I mean, we all know Mitch McConnell is a serious political tactician. I'm not sure he's going to let that one fly.
And think about this. What would Joe Manchin want in West Virginia, Democratic senator? He'd want another chance to vote to make the individual rate permanent. And the reason why he would want that is because he voted against the corporate rate. Now he could say, listen, I was always for the individual rate, and now I can prove it with my vote. So, and you think about Claire McCaskill. You know Claire McCaskill would use this to her advantage. You know that Heidi Heitkamp would. So you're not going to get to 60, and yet you give these guys plenty of room. And then if the House passes it, it even puts even more pressure on McConnell. So I think McConnell's right. I think we should do this if we're going to do it next year. And I think there's some downside if you do it right before this election. Theory 3, I run, therefore I ran. President Trump fulfilled another campaign promise by pulling out of President Obama's agreement, and it's not a treaty, agreement with the Iranian regime that the Iranians would get rid of their nuclear stockpile in exchange for lots of money from which they can fund Hezbollah terrorists. The president said, we're not going to do this anymore, and pulled out of the agreement and agreed to put sanctions on the Iranian regime. Adam Belmar, you've been on I-24 and other television stations talking about this Iranian agreement and the idea of the Americans pulling out of it. How does this play?
Well, the question of how it plays is a lot different than the propriety of having done it in the first place. And you didn't ask me about that, so I won't go into it.
No, please, go for it.
On the first part, I would just say that you made an excellent point. This was not a treaty. It wasn't ratified by the United States Senate. It was something that was truly rushed into in a very single-minded way. I don't want to cut the knees out from underneath our former president and what they were trying to do, stemming the tide of a growing nuclear threat from Iran that now includes ballistic missiles. Absolutely critical. There's no doubt that there's no change in our policy on wanting to stop that, but they came up incredibly short. They really punted down the road the question of not if, but when the Iranians would be able to get back on the nuclear horse and ride again. So where does it go from here now that we've pulled out? I think that it can indeed, John, play into the hands of Donald Trump and the American delegation going to Singapore. I don't think it says at all that you can't trust the word of the American government when it comes to arms agreements. What it says is, if we find evidence of noncompliance, if we find evidence that this deal isn't working and it's not stopping what it was meant to stop, we're going to pull out. We're going to do a new deal, and right now we're going to make a deal that will hold up and pass muster with the North Koreans. I think it plays very well in the short term. Really, what comes out of Singapore is what's going to be the tail of the tape.
So, John Easton, do you agree with what Adam's saying? Do you think that this strengthens the president's hand in Singapore, or does it weaken his hand?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I really there's such different scenarios here in terms of foreign policy and foreign policy objectives that I'm not sure one has an effect on it. I'm sure it has an effect, but I would say it probably is strengthens more than weakens Trump's hand. But if you look at sort of at the on the home front, what I find really interesting is I actually think that Donald Trump has a lot of latitude with Americans on this. Yeah. I do. One, I think that most Americans don't know the minutia of the Iranian deal in the first place, and two, Americans don't trust Iran's leaders now, and really, I don't think they ever have. Certainly since the hostage crisis back in the 70s, and so I think going into this, I think one thing that Americans are impressed with is that he's just not going to follow the global status quo that they're really used to, which is a lot of talk, and not much changes.
So when the President Obama signed this agreement with the Iranian regime.
Right, which was not unilateral. It was a multilateral deal.
Multilateral with the French and the Germans and a bunch of the Europeans.
And the
Chinese and the Russians. Yeah.
And they all got in because they all wanted to get some trade in, especially in Europe. They wanted plenty of trade.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah. This is a huge.
It's all about business for the.
Well, not
Europeans,
all about,
but mostly about. Yeah. And I've always thought that to be the case. But when President Obama signed this agreement, multilateral agreement, Chuck Schumer was against it. Robert Menendez was against it. Almost every Jewish Democrat in the Congress was against it. And all of a sudden, they're saying now that Donald Trump pulls out of an agreement that they opposed, how dare you pull out of this? I mean, what's up with these guys?
There's a great deal of insincerity going on, and we see it all the time. And you know what? No one's prone from it. Republicans, Democrats, we're all the same cats, okay? People are involved.
I don't know. That's my hypocrisy is better than their hypocrisy.
Right. But I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that I've seen these arguments made effectively on both sides and in different situations. And it's because of that experience that leads me to know that deep down underneath this rhetoric, there is some principled stance that will ultimately come to fruition with a vote. They're going to posture and they're going to posture and they're going to name call. But when the time comes, I think there is a recognition that we can get a lot more with Iran than we got. And like the North Koreans, we can also begin to see some of our hostages come home. I mean, we left so many things outside the scope of that deal, and the president's coup of just getting some people home, that feels great. I'm not saying it's the whole deal, but on the optics of moving forward on the world stage, the president has got his stuff together.
Yeah, and I'd say diplomatically, let's just take a step back to last October when the president said, hey, I don't like this deal. Well, he talked about in the campaign how he didn't like this deal, but in October he said, I'm really thinking about pulling out of the Iran deal, and that was a while ago. And so these our allies in Europe, in particular, France, UK, Germany, really had the ability to work closely with us to try to address some of the glaring weaknesses of the Iran deal. And there just, from what I understand, there just wasn't much at all. And now he's announced that we're pulling out, and they are apoplectic. And of course, the Obama team is completely coming unhinged.
Well, John Kerry to start out.
Well,
He might have some problems with the Logan Act. Couple of points. I read a really fascinating article in the fake news New York Times. Just kidding. I like the New York Times. I get a lot of news from there. I'm not calling it fake news. But it was about the impact on the Iranian regime, which I thought it wasn't really picked up anywhere else. Trump pulling out of this is actually bad for the hardliners in Iran, bad for some of the moderates too. But the fact is that the Iranian regime itself has not given any economic success to their own people. And there are people in Iran who are sick and tired of the mullahs, sick and tired of the religious police, and just want to have a decent life. And what this agreement did was gave the mullahs some chance to loosen up the economic ties and strengthen them. And this is actually strategically, it is actually a brilliant way to put more pressure on the Iranian regime.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Take just a look at the way that President Trump decided to brand his tax reform last year. It was the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And you know what? I need a taste. The people of Iran didn't get a taste of the good fortune that came from the relief of sanctions. The people of Iran didn't see any meaningful change or uptick in their economic well-being as a result of moving back from the nuclear weapons brink. And now that they're back behind the eight ball, it's going to get worse. And that's nothing but sliding backwards from their perspective. And I bet it does put a lot of those hardliners in trouble.
John Easton, do you think that this is going to increase the chances of we've already seen some ramifications. Iranian forces are firing some rockets into southern Israel or northern Israel and the Golan Heights. Is this going to increase the chances for a real kind of dramatic war, or is this just kind of some tension that comes inevitably from a very, very tough area?
It could, but I'll tell you what. I mean, you don't mess with the Israelis. I mean, they just when they go in hard, and they go in with a lot of power. But once again, I mean, to your question, I mean, think of what that says. Iran is in Syria. I mean, their presence in Syria has only increased since this deal that President Obama signed. They are also still supporting Hezbollah. They are also still supporting Hamas and, of course, Assad. And as we knew from Israeli intelligence, they've been cheating on the nuclear parameters on this deal. So I think that's one of the reasons why Americans are very apprehensive about trusting this pact, if that's what you want to call it.
So, Adam, the last point on this, the president pulls out of Paris, the climate treaty, pulls out of Iran, the Iranian agreement.
Yeah.
The fact is that he plowed much different ground in North Korea. If you look at, for example, in Burma, the Obama administration was very pro Aung San Suu Kyi. I can't never say her name right, but the Burmese leader. But there is this massacre happening in the Rohingya region, where people are being slaughtered. President Trump has been much harsher on that regime than the Obama administration. I mean, this idea that the Trump administration is somehow out of step, but what they're really doing is telling what the Obama administration did on a consistent basis was wrong, and he's going to change it. Is that right?
I think that's a fair characteristic and a characterization, and I think that on that that issue in particular, we've probably been a little slower to react maybe than we might have been, or to be more forceful in policy around that because of the tumult at state. But I think under the direction of the new Secretary of State, the President's attention to it, and a very sympathetic group of statesmen in the United States Senate and women who care deeply about our reputation in the world and what it is to respect human rights and stop devastating crimes against humanity. We have to play that role. I see a brighter answer to that question going forward, but it's going on in the background, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. But I think the Trump administration actually stepped up in places that the Obama administration wouldn't step up, and I think that's a good thing, especially in Myanmar, Burma. But John Easton, looking at the president, he's basically telling the Obama team, go take a hike.
There's no question about that, and undoing a lot of what they did over the course of 8 years, and which over 8 years, because you've worked in an administration, there's a lot. That's a long time to get some things done. I mean, it goes by probably like that, but I do think that what occurs to me that not many presidents are willing to do is to really challenge the European status quo, sort of that European bureaucracy and the global bureaucracy that is sort of like has a single-mindedness, really, and it's kind of a go along, get along, and really some self-preservation of where of the European leaders and Merkel, and it's a little bit of a lazy and at times do nothing attitude to sort of kind of try to keep things the way they are and don't upset the apple cart. And I think what President Trump is doing coming in, and certainly with his team, and they're a very aggressive team, he's not putting up with it. Right. He's just going to say, you know what, we haven't gotten any results in years, so let's go in and break some China. And I'm actually one that supports that.
Yeah, and I think, when the president and the French and the English went in and did that kind of punitive action against the Syrians, and once again, the Germans sat out. I mean, this is the thing, is that the president's finding allies where he can and doing stuff that he needs to do, and I think more power to him. Adam Belmar, what are you buying or selling today?
Well, I'm selling my car, John.
We laugh, but we cry.
We cry.
I'm almost wishing I had the wide shot for that laugh. There it is. My car got broken into again this week.
How many times has that been?
It's been twice.
Where are you parking it?
I park it right back behind EFB.
Oh, EFB is in a dangerous neighborhood.
We're not in a dangerous neighborhood, but it is a place where, unfortunately, there are car break-ins, and sometimes there's no rhyme or reason. There was nothing in my car to steal in the first place. But one thing I will say is about public transportation. We've talked about this here. It's going through a rough go here in Washington, D.C. after disrepair for many years. But this is a neighborhood where you don't need a car. This is a neighborhood in this city where you can get around using public transportation and Uber and other things. And I'm going to try that for a while because, not having a parking space and paying all that money for a car is just too much. So that's what I'm selling this week.
How much? How much are you asking? A couple thousand? 5,000?
At this point, it's a lease. I'm really just turning it back. But I was calling it a sell.
That sounded good, though.
John Easton, what are you buying or selling today?
I'm selling both. I know you're shocked.
All right.
I'm selling. I mean, I'm buying and I'm selling. Let me buy Monica Lewinsky and her tweet.
Oh, that was awesome.
And for those of you who have not seen this yet, and I'm certainly not saying all of you have, she was, let me just read her tweet. Please don't invite me to an event, especially one about social change. And then, after I've accepted, uninvite me because Bill Clinton then decided to attend or was invited. It's 2018. Emily Post would definitely not approve. And then she did a emoji piece, me. From what I have seen from Monica Lewinsky over the last really 5, 6, 7 years, is a woman with a lot of class who has handled a really, really, really rough treatment over those years with Bill Clinton and the whole scandal. She's just handled it, wonderfully. She has kind of risen up from the ashes and made something of herself. I think just in public, and she does it very well. Here's what I am going to sell. I'm going to sell Town and Country, who were the ones who invited her. Oh, this is really the worst of the worst in terms of not just etiquette, but just how you treat somebody and how you treat somebody who...
Bad business.
Bad business. That's not excellent for business.
This comes as no surprise to my colleagues. I am selling the intentional walk rule. Oof. Especially in Little League.
Get a load of this.
It's bad enough when they intentionally walk Bryce Harper. I think it's bad form, but that's baseball. These guys are getting paid a lot of money. I get it. That's fine. But I don't think the fans are going to watch Bryce Harper get intentionally walked, and I think it's a crappy tactic. It's especially bad when a Little Leaguer gets the intentional walk twice. Happened to my son. He's 12. I think it's outrageous. No intentional walks for Little League. I think coaches who do it should really think twice about what they're doing.
Look, did you win the game? Did you lose the game?
We won the game.
And by how much?
We won the game by about 3 runs.
Okay.
Congratulations.
So we won, yeah. But you know what? I still think it's not about the wins and losses. What it's about is, trying to let the kids learn and play. They don't learn a whole lot with the intentional walk. I just think I'm against it. Anyway, guys, thank you once again. 1 year anniversary of the Fear Theory podcast brought to you by EFB. It's been a lot of fun. We'll have at least 1 more year, maybe a 5-year contract. We're negotiating that with ourselves. Just kidding. We're going to keep this going. Next week, we're going to have Congressman Tom Rooney. Week after that, Terry Heffernan. And we're going to have a special guest after that we have not named yet because we don't know. But
they'll be special.
They'll be special.
Let's just wait and see
All
how it
our
turns
guests
out.
are special.
They are.
But thank you for joining the podcast. EFB means
excellent for business.
Yeah, baby.
All right.
Yeah, baby.